Welcome to a deep dive into an architectural feature that's, well, far more than just a stone carving. Today we're unpacking the intriguing world of gargoyles.
And we've got a fantastic stack of sources for this one, including some really detailed historical accounts. Our mission, really, is to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge about these mysterious figures.
Yeah, everything from their, practical purpose to the wild legends and human stories they embody.
Exactly.
You might think you know what a gargoyle is, but honestly, get ready for some truly surprising facts, a journey through centuries of history, and a look at why these stone creatures have, well, captivated our imaginations for so long.
They really have.
So let's start at the absolute beginning. When we talk about a gargoyle, what's the very first fundamental thing we need to understand about what it is? What sets it apart from all the other incredible sculptures you see on old buildings?
Well, the defining feature, always, 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 is that water spout. At its core, a gargoyle is a carved or formed grotesque, but it acts as a spout. Its primary purpose is basically ingenious plumbing, to convey water from a roof, channeling it away from the masonry walls below.
Right, because otherwise the water would just
stream down the side, exactly. Eroding the stone, the mortar, over time. It's a real problem.
And it wasn't just one big water spout usually, was it? They were pretty strategic about placing them.
Oh, absolutely. Architects often used multiple gargoyles, almost like a team, really, to divide the flow of rainwater.
Ah.
Right. This minimized potential damage, especially during heavy storms. The mechanism itself is quite clever. There's a channel or a trough cut into the back of the gargoyle, and the rainwater typically exits right through its open mouth.
So it literally spits the water out. I love that image. And they often look like these elongated, fantastical animals for a reason, too, don't they? That shape wasn't just random.
No, not at all. The length of the gargoyle helped determine how far the water was directed away from the wall. You wanted to get it clear.
Makes sense.
And we see their connection to Gothic slide buttresses, too. Sometimes aqueducts were actually cut directly into the buttress itself to divert water over the aisle walls. It's a remarkable blend of, engineering and artistry.
Oh, hold on, though. You mentioned a grotesque there a second ago, because what about those sculptures that look just like gargoyles? Same style, same scary faces maybe, but they aren't actually water spouts. Are they still gargoyles?
That's a crucial distinction and where a lot of confusion comes in. If a sculpture isn't a functional water spout, the technical term for it is actually a grotesque or sometimes a chimera or even a boss. You might hear regional terms like hunky-punk, too.
Yeah, hunky-punk.
Right. But what's fascinating here is that both the functional gargoyles and these purely ornamental grotesques, they often shared a common belief among the people who made them and saw them.
Which was?
That they were said to protect whatever they guarded like a church, typically from evil or harmful spirits, sort of like spiritual bouncers.
Okay, so if it doesn't gargle water, technically it's not a gargoyle. Got it. Which leads me to another question. Where did the word itself come from? Gargoyle doesn't sound very English.
No, it's got quite a journey. It originates from the Old French term gargouille. By the late 13th century, that specifically referred to a conduit for water flow.
Okay.
And it's truly a linguistic gem because it's onomatopoeic.
Onomatopoeic, like buzz or hiss. So the word actually sounds like what it does.
Precisely. It's made up of an onomatopoeic root, garg, combined with the Old French gueule, which means animal mouth or throat. That's actually the same root as our English word gullet, and this connects directly back to the Latin gula and the root gurg or garg, meaning to swallow. It represented the gurgling sound of water passing through.
Wow.
You can even see the linguistic links to the French verb gargarizer, and of course our own English word gargle.
So the very word itself gurgles. It captures the sound of the water it's designed to expel. That's incredible. A perfect sonic mirror for their function.
It really is. And just to round out the linguistic picture, in Italian, for a functional water spout, they use docione or grande sporgente, which means protruding gutter. Pretty straightforward.
Right.
But for those grotesque shapes that aren't spouts, they often use gargola or garguglia, which are basically direct borrowings from the French.
Fascinating. Now, before we dive deeper into the architectural history side of things, there's this captivating French legend connected to the very name gargoyle that's just too good to pass up. It really sets the stage, I think, for how these creatures captured the popular imagination.
Oh, it's a fantastic story. It centers around Saint Romanus. He was the bishop of Rouen back in the 7th century, around 631, 641 AD.
Okay.
And the legend says he delivered the countryside around Rouen from this monstrous creature called Gargoyle, or sometimes Goji.
And what was this gargoyle like? Was it just a big, generic, scary beast?
Oh, it was the classic dragon archetype, really. Bat-like wings, a long neck, and crucially, the terrifying ability to breathe fire. Pretty much. Yeah. The story has a couple of versions for how Ramones actually subdued it. Huh. One says he used a crucifix. Another says he got help from a condemned man who was apparently the only person brave enough to volunteer.
A bit of a gamble there.
Right. But in both versions, the monsters eventually led back to Rouen and burned.
But the head and neck wouldn't burn, right? I remember reading this. That's the key part.
That's it. Its head and neck would not burn, supposedly because they had been tempered by its own fire breath.
Wow.
And so, this unburnt head was then mounted on the walls of the newly built church. Its purpose? To scare off evil spirits and provide protection. It essentially became the first symbolic gargoyle, born from the vanquished monster itself.
That's such a powerful image. A church protected by the very beast it supposedly conquered. Amazing origin story. And there's a unique commemoration of this event too, isn't there? Something about prisoners.
There is, yeah. For centuries, the archbishops of Rouen were granted this special privilege. They could set one prisoner free on the very day the saint's reliquary was carried in procession. Talk about a unique way to remember a local legend.
Absolutely. So that legend really explains the spirit of the gargoyle, perhaps. But when did these things start appearing as actual architectural features? Was it purely a medieval invention?
Well, while the term gargoyle as we use it is most often applied to medieval work, the actual concept of diverting water off buildings using spouts is truly ancient.
Oh, really? Like how ancient?
We see it in ancient Egyptian architecture, for instance. Their water spouts were typically in the form of a lion's head, and interestingly showed very little variation over time, consistent design.
Lions again. So even thousands of years ago, they were thinking about protecting their buildings from water damage and using these animal forms. What about the Greeks? Did they do something similar?
The Greeks did it too. You find similar lion-mouth water spouts on Greek temples, often carved in marble or sometimes terracotta, integrated right into the cornice. A fantastic example is the Temple of Zeus. It originally had, get this, 102 lion-headed spouts.
Wow.
102, yeah. Though only about 39 remain today. Many apparently snapped off over time, simply due to the sheer weight of the marble. Imagine the engineering challenge there.
No kidding. 102 lion heads spitting water during a storm.
That must have been quite a sight. So what does all this ancient history mean for medieval cathedrals? Because that's where most of us really picture gargoyles, right?
It's definitely where they became truly iconic, yeah. Many medieval cathedrals included not just functional gargoyles, but also those ornamental chimeras we mentioned.
Right.
According to Eugène Viollet-le-Duc, he was a famous 19th century French architect who actually produced many gargoyles himself. During restorations, he claimed the earliest known medieval gargoyles appeared on Laon Cathedral. That dates them back to around 1200 to 1220.
Okay, so early 13th century. And of course, the most famous example today has to be Notre Dame de Paris. Are those the originals we see? Well, that's interesting. While Notre Dame is absolutely famous for them, its 54 chimeras, remember, the non-water spout kind were actually added much later, during the major 1843 restoration project led by Viollet-le-Duc himself.
Ah, so they're 19th century editions, mostly.
Many of the most famous ones, yes. But medieval gargoyles, the functional ones, showed a huge variety. Some depicted monks or combinations of real animals and people, and many were actually quite humorous.
Right.
But it's always worth reiterating that technical distinction we talked about. Chimeras were purely ornamental, not rainspouts, even though today they're popularly called gargoyles.
So the famous Notre Dame gargoyles watching over Paris are technically grotesques, but still magnificent.
Okay, but this era of prominent, often fantastical gargoyles didn't last forever, did it? When did they start to fade out?
No, it didn't last forever. They were in common use, generally speaking, until the early 18th century. Their decline can probably be attributed to a few reasons.
Like what? Well, some people apparently found them genuinely frightening. And also because they were often quite heavy and projected out from the building, they occasionally fell off, causing damage or even injury below. Not ideal.
Yeah, you wouldn't want a multi-ton stone creature landing near you. So practicality and safety concerns ultimately won out over the artistry?
In many ways, yes. But the most significant shift, the real nail in the coffin for functional gargoyles, came with the London Building Act of 1724.
What did that do?
This act made the use of downpipes, you know, the vertical pipes we still use today, compulsory in all new construction in London. And that trend spread. It essentially marked the end of widespread gargoyle creation for purely functional purposes. a quieter, less dramatic end to their practical role than their often dramatic design might suggest.
Okay, so downpipes took over the water-moving job. Now, this is where things get truly fascinating and maybe a bit complex. You might think the purpose of a gargoyle was obvious: spit water, look cool or scary, right? But beyond that practical function, there are actually a lot of divided ideas about why they were there, symbolically. What's one of the main theories?
One of the most prominent theories, deeply rooted in medieval Christian thought, is that gargoyles were meant to illustrate evil and sin. They served as what are called apotropaic devices.
Capotropaic, meaning?
Meaning they were specifically designed to ward off evil, to avert harm, almost like a stone-carved good luck charm for the church building itself, frightening away demons.
So they were like a visible warning or maybe a spiritual barrier. And yet what's really interesting is that not everyone in the church was a fan of these figures, were they? There was pushback.
That's absolutely right. What's fascinating here is the historical opposition to these very figures from within the church itself. We have St. Bernard of Clairvaux, a very influential 12th century Cistercian abbot.
Oh.
He was famously critical of what he called the fantastic monsters being carved on monastery cloisters. He found them distracting, absurd, almost insulting to the seriousness of monastic life and prayer.
He didn't approve?
Not at all. He famously asked, and this is a direct quote, "What are these fantastic monsters doing in the cloisters before the eyes of the brothers as they read?" He clearly thought they were completely inappropriate and, well, ridiculous.
I can just picture him shaking his head in dismay. Okay, but were there other theories floating around beyond just warding off evil spirits? It seems like they had too much personality, too much variety to be just that.
Absolutely. Another idea suggests they were simply relics, sort of lingering pagan mythology. Figures may be passed down through fireside tales, representing an older, pre-Christian world just absorbed into the new context.
Interesting.
And there's the rather intriguing thought that some gargoyles weren't just meant to scare spirits, but were meant to intimidate humans.
Intimidate humans. How so? That sounds a bit dark.
We'll take the example of the two gargoyles that supposedly guarded the gateway of Amiens in France. Legend had it they would spew acid on anyone entering the city with bad intentions.
Acid. Wow.
But conversely, they'd shower the king with coins upon his virtuous return. A bit of selective intimidation. We also see anthropomorphized gargoyles, human figures fused with animalistic attributes like a harpy or cynocephaly, the dog-headed figures.
Right.
These were often interpreted as representing the torturous fate awaiting sinners. A very vivid warning.
So a constant, visceral reminder of potential consequences. But then to complicate things even further, there's the counter-argument that maybe some were purely decorative, right? No deep symbolic meaning at all.
Precisely. Take the monkey gargoyle found in Jacques Coeur's palace in Bourges, France. Jacques Coeur was a wealthy merchant. The monkey was purely ornamental, likely nodding to his travels and exotic lifestyle, as monkeys certainly weren't native to medieval France.
Okay.
So if we try to connect all these threads, it becomes pretty clear there isn't one single simple answer for why they were there.
It sounds like it's really a mosaic of meanings then, depending on the time, the place, the specific carving.
Exactly. It's most likely that gargoyles held different meanings, or perhaps multiple meanings simultaneously, depending on their specific context. As Lester Burbank Brittingham, an expert on Gothic sculpture, wisely cautioned, and I think this is important, he said, there was much symbolism in the sculpture of the Gothic period, but we must be wary of reading in too much meaning.
That's a really good reminder. We can interpret, but we can't always know for certain the original intent. Okay, let's look at the incredible variety in their forms now, starting with animals, which you mentioned ancient civilizations used too. How did that play out in medieval Europe?
Well, back in the 12th century especially, as the Roman Catholic Church was really consolidating its power and converting large populations, images became absolutely crucial. Most people were illiterate.
Right, visual communication was key.
Exactly. They communicated doctrine through visuals. And many early gargoyles depicted some version of a dragon, particularly in France, tying back perhaps to that St. Romanus legend we discussed.
Ah, okay.
Their gaping mouths evoke the fearsome, destructive power of these legendary beasts, constantly reminding the laity, the churchgoers, of the church's protective, conquering role over evil and chaos.
So these dragon-like figures weren't just generic monsters. They often had a specific connection to the church's narrative of conquering evil, like trophies.
In a way, yes. It's even believed by some scholars that these dragon-like monsters represented actual beasts, perhaps pagan symbols or local threats that founding bishops had metaphorically, or literally in legend, rid from their towns.
Okay.
Anthropomorphized animals also played a role. That's where you see animals given human qualities. This potentially helped make Catholic doctrine more relatable or understandable to people coming from pagan traditions with strong animal symbolism.
Makes sense.
It's also worth noting, just as a side point, that gargoyles depicting animals that were completely unknown in medieval Western Europe, like rhinoceroses or hippopotamuses that you sometimes see on later buildings, those are obviously modern additions. They wouldn't have held that kind of symbolic meaning back in medieval times.
Right, context is everything. Now, one truly prominent animal figure you see again and again is the lion. You mentioned the Egyptians used them. What was its significance in medieval Europe?
Oh, the lion was hugely symbolic. Hugely. Partly due to its frequent appearances in other medieval art, but also drawing on ancient beliefs. Lions became a really powerful symbol of Christ.
Of Christ himself. How so?
Well, they were said to share Christ's characteristics. For example, legend had it that the lion's tail could erase its tracks as it walked, allowing it to elude the devil. And even more strikingly, the lioness, it was believed, gave birth to dead cubs that would then resurrect miraculously in 3 days when the male lion breathed on them, a clear parallel to the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Wow, that's incredibly specific symbolism.
It is. And beyond these divine associations, lions were generally seen as inherently virtuous creatures. They were believed to embody loyalty, courage, and even controlled emotions. They were truly multi-layered symbols of power and virtue.
That's a really deep dive into lion symbolism. Okay, so if animals were so crucial for conveying these complex ideas, how did gargoyles eventually evolve to depict human forms? And were these human depictions as, well, virtuous as the lions?
Human depictions were indeed later developments, almost a natural progression, you could say, as stone carving techniques evolved and perhaps interests shifted. But what's fascinating here is the often comedic, sometimes even body or crude nature of these human gargoyles.
Comedic and body, how so?
Well, some were quite literally positioned to imply they were vomiting or even defecating the rainwater out.
Oh my, that's certainly a far cry from a noble, Christ-like lion. What on earth were these human figures representing them?
They were often connected to or interpreted as representing common acts of sinners. You might see figures interpreted as prostitutes or greedy moneylenders, and sometimes even what were considered social sins back then. Like, for instance, depictions of a woman reading. In some medieval contexts, women engaging independently in literature or scholarship were sometimes frowned upon or seen as neglecting their expected duties.
Wow, that's illuminating about the times. So, if the original idea, or one of them, was to ward off evil, why these often humorous, sarcastic, even critical human figures? That seems almost contradictory. Were they just poking fun at people?
It does seem contradictory, doesn't it? And that's where interpretation gets really interesting. One hypothesis suggests that many of these human gargoyles were indeed intended as criticisms of common church attendees, serving as a kind of mirror for introspection.
Like, see yourself in this sinner.
Perhaps, yeah. Prompting self-reflection about one's own failings. But there's an alternative view, which is also compelling, that the shift towards human characteristics, even flawed ones, actually created a sense of familiarity and relatability for the everyday churchgoer. Maybe it wasn't always about stern judgment.
That makes sense too. Maybe a little bit of self-deprecating humor or just acknowledging human imperfection.
Exactly. And the furthest evolution in these human forms, arguably the most artistically impressive, is the corbel head.
Corbel heads. What are those exactly?
These were often extremely realistic and finely carved representations of human heads or faces, used as supportive architectural elements, but often given incredible detail. They truly showcase the stone carver's skill in depicting human facial structure and, importantly, emotion.
Were they supposed to be specific people or just types of people?
They weren't really exclusive to any particular social class. They seemed to represent a fair cross-section of medieval society. However, it was actually very common for them to mock the clergy.
Mocking the clergy on the church itself.
Yes, and what's truly intriguing is their often hidden locations. For example, the incredible corbel heads high up on Reims Cathedral were apparently only properly discovered and documented in the early 20th century when photographers were finally allowed to scale the building. They were tucked away, almost out of sight from below.
Hidden mockery. That's brilliant. Why hide them?
Well, because of these frequently obscured locations. A couple of theories emerged. One is that maybe they were practice sites for apprentice stone carvers, a place where they could hone their craft away from prominent public view.
Plausible.
But another, perhaps more exciting theory, connects it to the suspected frustration of these highly skilled artisans who might have felt they received disproportionate compensation or recognition from the wealthy clergy commissioning the work.
Ah, the age-old artist versus patron tension.
Exactly. So some believe that these stonecutters created these sometimes obnoxious, tongue-out, mouth-pulling, face-making corbel heads as a way to subtly and safely mock the clergy they worked for, their own quiet, stony rebellion.
A little hidden artistic protest carved forever into the church. I absolutely love that. Okay, so for the longest time, gargoyles and grotesques were pretty much exclusive to Europe. But their intrigue, their style, eventually traveled across the Atlantic. Did they really make it to America in any significant way?
Oh, absolutely they did. You can certainly find gargoyles, or more often grotesques inspired by them, in American architecture, particularly during the Gothic revival period in the 19th and early 20th centuries.
Any specific examples come to mind?
Sure. Think of the Harvard Law School building classic Gothic revival architecture. It features them prominently on its columns.
Okay. And any famous names involved in bringing them over?
You bet. Gutzon Borglum, for instance. Yes, the same sculptor who later did Mount Rushmore.
No way.
Yeah. He sculpted grotesques early in his career at Princeton College. And George B. Post was another key architect who frequently incorporated grotesques on his New York City buildings.
Where in New York?
Well, notably across the various buildings of the College of the City of New York, and also, interestingly, 4 distinct corbel heads tucked under a balcony at the National Arts Club building down in Gramercy Park South. It was definitely a way for these newer American institutions to connect with that sense of old world history, gravitas, and maybe a little bit of that mystery.
So it wasn't just about copying an architectural style. It was about importing that sense of story and depth that gargoyles represented.
Exactly. And it wasn't just institutional buildings. Other important figures include E.F. Gilbert. His gargoyles on the Newark Manual Training School in New Jersey were actually designed specifically to represent various aspects of the school's curriculum.
That's clever.
Isn't it? And John Russell Pope, another famous architect, carved several incredible wood grotesques, not stone, with really distinct human expressions at Deepdale, which was a private estate on Long Island belonging to the Vanderbilt family.
Wood gargoyles. Interesting. Now, what's fascinating here, too, is how these artistic interpretations, these new American gargoyles, also sort of helped educate the public about the originals back in Europe. Wasn't that right?
Yes, that's a great point. John Taylor Arms, for instance, was an American etcher who played a significant role in this. He didn't sculpt them, but he created incredibly detailed etchings of various famous European gargoyles, including those at Notre Dame Cathedral, Amiens Cathedral, and others. His works were widely regarded as incredibly accurate, really capturing the emotion and the character of the original stone carvings.
So he brought them to life on paper for people who might never see the real thing.
Precisely. He helped bring these European wonders closer to a new American audience, popularizing their image and maybe sparking curiosity about their history. He truly helped bring them to life, in a way, for a whole new generation.
It's amazing how these figures traveled. So from ancient waterspouts in Egypt and Greece to medieval protectors and jesters to these later artistic revivals and even educational tools. It's clear that gargoyles are far, far more than just architectural ornaments. They really are silent storytellers carved in stone, aren't they?
Absolutely. We've seen how their purpose, their meaning, their form have shifted so much throughout history. They reflect evolving beliefs, changing artistic trends, even that quiet social commentary we talked about. It's really a testament to the enduring power of stone, imagination, and, well, the need to keep rainwater off your walls.
Indeed. You've now taken a deep dive into the truly fascinating world of gargoyles. So next time you look up at an old building, maybe a cathedral, maybe even a university library, what new details will you notice? What stories might the stone be trying to tell you?
Yeah, what might these silent, often watchful figures still be saying about the people who made them, and maybe even in some small way about us?
Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we extract the most important nuggets of knowledge from a stack of sources, all custom-tailored for you. Today, we're taking a fascinating plunge into one of the world's most renowned institutions, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT. We've taken a deep look at its comprehensive Wikipedia page to uncover its origins, its unique culture, and, well, its incredible impact on our modern world.
Yeah, our mission today is really to give you a shortcut to being well-informed about MIT, understanding not just what it is, but why it matters, and how its distinctive approach has shaped so much of science and technology.
Okay, let's unpack this. What exactly is the Massachusetts Institute of Technology? So we know it's a private research university, Cambridge, Massachusetts,
Right.
established way back on April 10th, 1861. And its official motto is Mens et Manus, Latin for mind and hand.
Exactly. And that motto, mind in hand, it really captures the vision behind MIT from the get-go. It was quite progressive for its time. It was founded by William Barton Rogers, really in response to the increasing industrialization happening in the U.S.
So a need for practical skills.
More than just skills. Rogers aimed to create useful knowledge. He adopted this polytechnic model, and this model stressed laboratory instruction in applied science and engineering. The focus was on the scientific principles.
Ah, the fundamentals.
Right, the principles that form the basis and explanation of leading processes rather than just, the minute details and manipulations of the arts. It was kind of reflecting the German research university model, too, emphasizing faculty doing research, instruction through seminars, labs.
That independent research focus.
Yes. And interestingly, it was initially funded by a federal land grant, part of the Morrill Land Grant Colleges Act.
Right, right. And speaking of those early days, I found this really interesting. Its first classes were actually delayed by the Civil War.
That's right. They finally started in Boston in 1865.
And it was informally called Boston Tech for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Despite chronic money problems early on, it grew significantly in the late 19th century. New programs, electrical, chemical, marine, sanitary engineering.
Building that polytechnic base.
But here's where it gets really interesting, I thought. Harvard University. They tried to merge with or absorb MIT, like 6 times.
Yeah, at least 6 attempts. It's quite a story.
How did MIT fend them off? I mean, Harvard was already such a powerhouse.
Well, it really speaks to MIT's independent streak, even back then.
Yeah.
The faculty and alumni consistently pushed back.
Yeah.
They valued their unique mission. There was one merger plan that famously collapsed in 1905 because the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court ruled MIT couldn't sell its Back Bay land.
Wow. So the court saved them that time.
Effectively, yes.
Right.
It blocked Harvard's move and really highlighted MIT's commitment to its own path, that mind-in-hand philosophy.
Okay, so after fighting off Harvard and needing more space than they had in Boston, they clearly needed to expand.
Right.
And that led to the move across the Charles River to Cambridge. In 1912, they acquired the current campus, 166 acres.
Huge space.
A huge move, and largely funded by anonymous donations at first.
From the mysterious Mr. Smith, exactly, who turned out to be George Eastman, the founder of Eastman Kodak.
And get this number, between 1912 and 1920, Eastman gave $20 million in cash and stock.
Which is just staggering.
Over $304 million in 2024 dollars.
Wow. That level of philanthropy really set them up.
Absolutely. And there was that symbolic crossing of the Charles in 1916 on the barge, the Boussinafor.
A nice bit of ceremony.
And then President Richard McLaurin launched the technology plan in 1920 to get more funding, rely less on the state.
And that technology plan was really quite pioneering. It wasn't just about fundraising. It established this industry funding model, new postgraduate programs, lab work, tackling actual industry problems.
So building those bridges between academia and industry early on.
Very early. It laid the groundwork for a lot of the partnerships we see today. Then, the 1930s, under President Carl Taylor Compton, there was a shift. A big emphasis on pure sciences, physics, chemistry. They actually reduced the vocational practice component somewhat.
Interesting, pulling back from the pure practical.
A bit, yeah. But even so, as late as 1949, a report noted that people still saw MIT as basically a vocational school, a perception problem.
Right, and the university wanted to change that. So that led directly to forming the School of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences and the MIT Sloan School of Management in 1950. The idea was to create a broader education, to compete, with the powerful schools of science and engineering internally.
Trying to balance things out.
Exactly. What stands out to you about that effort? Balancing the practical and the theoretical.
Well, what strikes me is how early they were thinking about this back in 1950. So many places focus on one or the other, but MIT saw the power in combining them, that synergy.
Right.
And maybe that foundation, that blend, set them up for what came next, like their involvement in wartime research.
Oh, absolutely. World War II dramatically ramped up military research at MIT. It had a profound impact.
Vannevar Bush heading the Federal Office of Scientific Research and Development. He directed a lot of funding their way. Significant funding, yes. The Radiation Laboratory, the RAD Lab, set up in 1940. They were crucial in helping the British develop microwave radar.
Wow. And other big projects, too.
Yeah, things like gyroscope-based inertial navigation systems from Charles Stark Draper's Instrumentation Lab, Project Whirlwind, an early digital computer for flight sims, high-speed photography under Harold Edgerton.
Just a hub of wartime innovation.
It really was. By the war's end, MIT was the nation's largest wartime R&D contractor, over $100 million before 1946. And that work continued post-war. Guidance systems for ballistic missiles, Project Apollo.
Huge government contracts.
But that deep involvement, it also led to pushback later on.
Right, the Vietnam era.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In the late 60s, early 70s, you saw student and faculty activists protesting the war and MIT's defense research. It was a really critical time.
The Union of Concerned Scientists started then.
Yes. Founded in 1969, specifically aiming to shift research focus away from military projects towards environmental and social issues.
And MIT responded.
They did. MIT divested itself from the Instrumentation Laboratory, moved all classified research off campus to the MIT Lincoln Lab facility in '73.
So, a real shift.
A definite shift. Though, compared to some other universities at the time, MIT was perhaps less polarized. But controversy didn't entirely disappear. There were debates in the '80s about space weapons research, chemical and biological warfare work.
It's fascinating how they navigated that. But even while grappling with those issues, something else was bubbling up. The digital revolution.
Yes, a completely different kind of revolution, but MIT was right at the heart of it.
Faculty and students were key in developing early computing and networking tech.
Absolutely. Groups like Project MA, the AI Lab, even the Tech Model Railroad Club.
The Railroad Club? Really?
Yeah. They wrote some of the earliest interactive computer games, like Space War. They were shaping modern hacker culture and even the language, the slang.
That's amazing, from model trains to Space War.
It shows that spirit of tinkering and invention. And several major computer organizations came out of MIT, too.
Like the GNU project. Richard Stallman.
Mid-'80s, foundational for free software. Then the MIT Media Lab in '85.
And Tim Berners-Lee founded the World Wide Web Consortium there in '94.
Setting the standards for the web we use every day.
Plus, they launched OpenCourseWare in 2002.
Making course materials free online. Over 2,000 classes.
And later edX, with Harvard for actual certification, really embracing open knowledge.
And that spirit continues. More recently, you see things like the MIT IBM Watson AI Lab in 2017, a $240 million investment from IBM.
Doubling down on AI.
And then in 2018, the announcement of the Schwarzman College of Computing, a $1 billion commitment to interdisciplinary AI, applying it everywhere from history to biology.
$1 billion for AI education. That's serious.
It's a massive statement about the future they envision, and their core science impact is still huge. Think about LIGO.
The gravitational wave detection.
Yes. MIT scientists were crucial. First detection in 2015. Rainer Weiss got the Nobel Prize in 2017 for it.
Incredible scientific achievement.
Of course, like any major institution, they also navigate current events. In April 2024, students protested the Gaza war, drawing parallels to past protests like Vietnam and South African apartheid.
And the source material noted the institution reported on this, including calls to end ties with the Israeli Ministry of Defense.
Yes, the reporting aimed to convey the information from the source impartially, reflecting the ongoing campus dialogue.
Right. Okay, let's walk through the campus itself. It definitely has its own vibe.
It really does.
166 acres along the Charles River in Cambridge, divided roughly by Mass Ave, Student Life West, Academics East.
The clear layout?
And the Harvard Brooch, the closest one. It's marked off in smoots.
Yes. The Smoot, a non-standard unit based on a student, Oliver Smoot, back in the 50s. It's become legendary.
Only at MIT. And the building numbering system, Course 1 for Civil Engineering, Course 6 for EECS.
That's another quirk. It comes from the original department designations. It's part of the MIT lexicon now.
And the tunnels? Lots of buildings are connected underground.
Yeah, an extensive network. Great for bad weather, but also famous for roof and tunnel hacking. Student explorations and pranks.
Ah, the hacking culture. We'll get to that. But the architecture itself is notable, too.
Definitely. The School of Architecture, founded in 1865, was actually the first formal architecture program in the U.S.
Wow, the first.
Yep. And they have a history of commissioning progressive buildings. Those original 1916 McLaurin buildings with the Great Dome.
Over Killian Court. Very iconic.
They were built of reinforced concrete, first for a non-industrial university building in the U.S. at the time. Shows that engineering mindset even in construction.
And the friezes have names like Aristotle, Newton, Darwin.
Paying homage to the giants.
Yeah.
And more recently, you've got Starkitecture. Frank Gehry's Data Center.
The crumpled-looking one?
That's the one. Stephen Hall's Simmons Hall, Fumihiko Maki's Media Lab extension. Very modern designs.
Although, didn't the Princeton Review once say the campus was tiny, unsightly, or both?
Haha, yes, that's a famous dig. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, I guess.
And student life. Undergrads get guaranteed housing for 4 years.
Yeah, in one of the 11 dorms. And they have very different personalities. East Campus is known for its thriving counterculture.
Right. And wasn't there a change after a tragedy? Freshmen have to live in dorms now.
Yes. Following an alcohol-related student death in 1997, MIT required all freshmen to live in the dorms starting in 2002.
Okay. Beyond the buildings and dorms, MIT is known for some really distinctive traditions.
Oh, yeah.
This strong focus on meritocracy and technical skill, like they've never awarded an honorary degree.
Almost never. They made exceptions for honorary professorships for Winston Churchill and Salman Rushdie, but that's it. No honorary doctorates.
And no athletic scholarships, no Latin honors at graduation.
Nope. It's all about what you achieve there. Your work speaks for itself.
And the brass rat, the class ring.
Ah, yes, the brass rat. Big, heavy, distinctive ring. Features a beaver, the mascot. The design changes slightly each year. A huge tradition for upper-class students and alumni.
And the informal motto, Aish TFP.
Uh-huh. Yes. Famously interpreted as, I hate this fucking place, during tough times.
We've all been there.
But also, I have truly found paradise when things click. It kind of captures the intense love-hate relationship students can have with the demanding environment.
Perfectly sums it up. And the rivalry with Caltech.
Oh, the prank rivalry. It's legendary. Very intellectual, very elaborate.
Like Caltech giving out shirts saying MIT because not everyone can go to Caltech.
Ouch. And MIT retaliated by stealing Caltech's 1.7-ton cannon.
They stole a cannon.
A 130-year-old cannon.
Yeah.
Drove it across the country and displayed it in Cambridge.
That's commitment to a prank.
Totally. There were attempts to put a TARDIS on a Caltech roof. Heat-activated mugs changing from MIT to Caltech, the hotter Institute of Technology. It's all in good fun, mostly.
A rivalry built on brains and mischief. Okay, let's shift to the academics, often described as intense.
That's an understatement.
It's a large, highly residential research university, mostly grad students, right?
Yeah, a majority are in graduate programs.
And they have that 414 calendar with the 4-week independent activities period, IAP, in January.
Right. Hundreds of optional classes, activities, often student-led, a chance to explore outside the regular curriculum.
And students just use numbers for courses and majors. Course 6, 8.01.
Yeah, that numbering system we mentioned, it's just how it's done, part of the culture.
And the grading for first-year students is pass no record.
Yes, designed to ease the transition. Because the pace, well, the famous analogy is drinking from a fire hose.
I've heard that, just an overwhelming amount of information.
Intense workload, high expectations.
Yeah.
But the curriculum also really pushes students to apply the knowledge. Back to mens et manus.
Mind in hand.
Exactly. Put the theory into practice.
And a big part of that is the UROP program, undergraduate research opportunities.
Yes, UROP is huge. Founded back in 1969, it lets undergrads work directly with faculty and researchers.
For credit or pay?
Can be for credit, pay, or volunteer. And the participation is massive. A big majority of undergrads do it.
And it leads to real results.
Often, yeah. Published papers, patents, even startups have come out of UROP projects. It's been so successful, it's been copied by many other universities.
That's impressive. But there was also some internal critique. The hidden curriculum.
Ah, Benson Snyder's book from 1970. Yeah, he was dean of institute relations. He argued that sometimes the real learning at MIT wasn't the subject matter, but learning how to figure out the system.
Like using old problem sets, course bibles, gaming the system.
Exactly. Snyder worried this focus on beating the system could actually hinder real creative thinking. It was a pretty bold critique from inside.
That makes you think. But despite that, the rankings are consistently stellar.
Oh, absolutely. Always among the top globally. School of Engineering is often ranked #1, and they're incredibly strong in computer science, natural sciences, business, architecture, economics, linguistics, math. Across the board, really.
That hidden curriculum idea is really something, isn't it? Makes you wonder how much learning is about mastery versus just performance. What does that mean for creativity long term?
It's a fundamental question about education, isn't it? But it also shows MIT is willing to ask those tough questions about itself, even with all its success. They're constantly thinking about how to foster real innovation.
Right. And that drive for impact, it extends way beyond the campus walls, the collaborations, the alumni
So the
ventures.
global reach is astonishing.
They really pioneered those links between academia, industry, and government, didn't they?
Historically, yes. Like President Compton co-founding American Research and Development Corporation in 1946, considered the first U.S. venture capital firm.
Talk about getting in early.
Incredible foresight. Now, they did face some accusations later, late 80s, early 90s, about transferring taxpayer-funded research to foreign firms.
Controversies happen.
And they fought off an antitrust suit in 91 about alleged price fixing on scholarships with Ivy League schools.
Right. But collaborations are also key, especially with Harvard being so close.
Yeah, lots of joint programs, the Harvard-MIT Division of Health Sciences and Technology, the Broad Institute for Genomics. Students can even cross-register for courses.
And similar links with Wellesley, Cambridge, Imperial College London.
Building those connections.
But the impact of MIT people,
Yeah.
the alumni and faculty, it's just staggering.
It really is. The numbers are mind-blowing. As of October 2024, 105 Nobel laureates affiliated with MIT.
105 Nobel Prizes.
26 Turing Award winners, the Nobel of Computing, 8 Fields medalists in math,
Wow.
and the company's founded by alumni, Intel, HP, Qualcomm, Bose, Dropbox, BuzzFeed. The list goes on and on.
And that statistic, if companies founded by MIT alumni form their own country,
Its GDP would be the 11th highest in the world.
that's unbelievable economic impact from one university's graduates.
It truly is.
Yeah.
And then there's space exploration. More than a third of U.S. crewed space flights have included MIT grads.
More than any university except the service academies.
Exactly. And 4 of the 12 people who walked on the moon graduated from MIT. Buzz Aldrin was one.
Incredible legacy, which really makes you ask, looking at this history of innovation and impact, what kind of future will MIT shape next? And what challenges will they face? Maybe challenges beyond just the next technological breakthrough.
That's the big question, isn't it? How does an institution like this continue to lead and adapt?
Well, what a deep dive that was. MIT, from its founding as this practical polytechnic school through wartime research, the digital revolution, that unique student culture of hacks and brass rats. It really lives that mind in hand motto, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
Balancing the intense academics with this vibrant, sometimes really quirky student life, and all the while producing these world-changing discoveries and companies.
Yeah, the story of MIT just highlights the incredible impact you can have when you combine that rigorous scientific thinking with a real drive for practical application. That mind-in-hand philosophy, it's still driving innovation, it's tackling global challenges, shaping the world we live in. You just think about how that blend of theory and practice influences the technology you use every single day, from your smartphone to medical advances, maybe even to understanding gravitational waves from across the universe. Have you ever felt like you knew a cultural icon inside and out, only to discover there were entire hidden layers to their story you never even considered? Today, we're taking a deep dive into just such a figure, Superman. I mean, his silhouette alone tells you exactly who it is, right?
Yeah.
But we promise you, beyond the red cape and the iconic S-shield, there's a fascinating, surprising, and at times intensely contentious history that goes far beyond what most people realize.
That's exactly right. Our mission today is to go beyond the surface. We're sifting through a wealth of source material, comprehensive excerpts detailing Superman's development, his sprawling impact, and even the intense legal battles that shaped his very existence. We want to help you understand not just who Superman is, but, how he came to be, why he's endured for over 8 decades, and the hidden complexities that make him so much more than just a superhero.
Precisely. So, by the end of this deep dive, you'll have a genuine shortcut to being truly well-informed about the Man of Steel. You'll hear about his unexpected origins, the dramatic creative evolution he underwent, and the profound cultural resonance that cemented his place in history. Okay, so with that overarching mission in mind, let's go back to where it all began, in Cleveland, 1932. Our story starts with 2 young friends, Jerry Siegel, an aspiring writer, and Joe Shuster, who wanted to be an illustrator. They bonded over their shared love for science fiction, dreaming of creating something truly sensational.
And this is where the story takes a really unexpected turn. Their very first Superman concept, which appeared in a short story in January 1933, was titled The Reign of Superman. Now here's the kicker. The titular character, Bill Dunn, was a homeless man tricked into consuming an experimental drug. His powers weren't strength or flight. They were mind reading, mind control, and clairvoyance. And get this, he used these powers maliciously for personal gain and amusement. Schuster even drew him as bald. Can you imagine that?
Wow. A bald, psychic villain to the beacon of heroism we know today. That's an incredible transformation. So what prompted Siegel to pivot from that villainous concept to a hero?
Well, Siegel quickly realized that heroic protagonists were just, far more successful in the burgeoning world of comic strips. So he reimagined Superman. The second prototype hero, from around 1934, was endowed with superhuman strength and bulletproof skin, a major departure from those early psychic abilities. Siegel later recalled a bat-like cape in some panels, but surviving artwork from that period shows no costume yet. The idea was clearly still evolving.
It sounds like a long and arduous journey to get this evolving character published. What were some of the hurdles they faced?
Oh, it was a real struggle. In 1933, Siegel and Shuster tried to syndicate the Superman as a comic book, but their concept was rejected. Apparently, sales of a similar book were disappointing. Siegel even briefly sought other artists, thinking maybe his youth was the problem. Shuster was reportedly so frustrated at one point he actually burned their rejected comic, saving only the cover.
No way, he burned it.
Yeah, can you believe it? And they also tried other versions, like a scientist adventurer from the far future and even a 3-year-old sent back in time. It just shows how many iterations they went through before landing on the winning formula.
It's fortunate they persevered. What finally brought them back together to create the Superman we recognize today?
Thankfully, Siegel and Shuster reconciled and resumed developing Superman together. This is when the truly pivotal change happened. The character became an alien from the doomed planet Krypton. With that origin in place, Shuster designed the now familiar costume tights with an S on the chest, overshorts, and a flowing cape. In early concept art, he even had laced sandals before they became those iconic red boots.
Sandals, that's a detail I never knew.
Right. And they also conceived of Clark Kent as this timid, mild-mannered journalist, and Lois Lane attracted to the bold Superman but completely oblivious to his alter ego. That dramatic contrast Siegel found really humorous, and it became central to the character's appeal.
So how did this finally lead to publication? It sounds like they were getting close.
The final push came in early 1938. They had been working with National Allied Publications, later DC Comics, on other strips. They were cautious, though, having faced erratic payments from another publisher, Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson. The real turning point came when Max Gaines from a newspaper syndicate rejected Superman for newspapers, but, crucially, suggested he be forwarded to Jack Leibowitz for this new magazine, Action Comics. Siegel and Shuster, pretty tired of rejections by this point, accepted the offer, creating 13 pages for Action Comics #1. They were paid a modest sum, around $130 at the time, which would be about $2,900 today.
Just $130 for the first story.
For the story, yes. And critically, on March 1st, 1938, they signed away the copyright for Superman to Detective Comics, Inc., a standard practice then, but one they would deeply, deeply regret later on.
And what an explosion of popularity it sparked. Action Comics #1 debuted on April 18th, 1938, and thanks to Superman, it was a massive success. But what's really fascinating, as you mentioned, is how diverse the influences were that shaped his development. It wasn't just one thing, was it?
Not at all. It's a true melting pot of ideas. Literally, you can see echoes of Edgar Rice Burroughs' John Carter of Mars, where lower gravity equaled enhanced strength, and Philip Wiley's 1930 novel Gladiator, which featured a protagonist with remarkably similar powers. Visually, Superman's powerful stance and confident attitude were influenced by adventure film characters like Douglas Fairbanks Sr., while Clark Kent's mild-mannered facade drew inspiration from the slapstick comedian Harold Lloyd. Even the name Metropolis was likely borrowed from the 1927 Fritz Lang film.
And Clark Kent is the journalist.
That reflected Siegel's own aspirations, yeah. And the classic love triangle with Lois Lane was reportedly inspired by Siegel's own awkwardness with girls. It added that human element.
And it wasn't just literary and cinematic influences, right?
Yeah.
The artistic style clearly played a part, too.
Absolutely. Joe Shuster, as an artist, admired legendary figures like Alex Raymond and Hal Foster. His personal interest in fitness culture and strongmen like Sigmund Breitbart and Joseph Greenstein definitely influenced Superman's muscular physique. It's also worth noting that the word Superman itself was commonly used in the 1920s and 30s for athletes and politicians. Any direct connection to Nietzsche's philosophical concept of the Übermensch, though, that remains unconfirmed by the creators.
Okay, so that covers a fascinating kind of twisty origin story. Let's shift gears now and talk about how his mythology and powers evolved over time.
Right. So moving from his origins to his evolving mythology, several core elements have remained pretty consistent. He's born Kal-El on Krypton, sent to Earth as a baby before Krypton's destruction, and found and adopted by Jonathan and Martha Kent, who name him Clark Kent. His hometown, Smallville, well, that took time. Initially unnamed, it was placed in Iowa in a 1947 radio serial, then named Smallville in the comics in 1949, and it's often been placed in Kansas since the 1978 movie.
It's incredible to see how much of his core mythology was built piece by piece. But what about the powers themselves? Did he always have the ability to fly, for instance? That seems so fundamental now.
That's a great question because what we take for granted now wasn't always there. Initially, in Action Comics #1, Superman just had superhuman strength and durability bullets simply bounced off him. The explanation then was that Kryptonians were millions of years advanced, which was later tweaked to be about Krypton's higher gravity making him stronger on Earth. Flight, which is so iconic, well, he couldn't fly in Action Comics #1. He could only run super fast and leap great distances, leap tall buildings in a single bound, right? Flight was actually introduced in the second episode of the radio serial in 1940 first, and then it made its way into the comics.
So the radio show influenced the comics in that way. Interesting. His powers obviously evolved quite a bit over time then. Which other abilities were added and how do they explain them?
Oh yeah, many of his now iconic powers were introduced gradually. X-ray vision debuted in 1939, superhuman hearing in the same year. Heat vision appeared later in 1949, and originally it was described as just a super intense form of his X-ray vision. Freeze breath arrived in 1959. A crucial reveal came in the early 1960s, specifically Superman, #146 in 1961, establishing that many of his powers other than strength were activated by Earth's yellow sun. Then Action Comics, #300 in 1963, confirmed that all his powers were yellow sun activated and deactivated by red sunlight. This gave a sort of scientific-ish basis to his abilities.
Right, the yellow sun explanation is key. And of course, every powerful hero needs a weakness. How do they introduce those? Kryptonite is the obvious one.
Well, his most famous weakness, green kryptonite, actually first appeared in a radio serial in 1943. It was a plot device so the voice actor Bud Collyer could take a vacation. Then it made its comic debut in Superman #61 in 1949. It nullifies his powers, causes pain and nausea, and prolonged exposure is fatal. Over time, other forms of kryptonite were introduced with, well, peculiar effects: red, gold, blue, white, black. Like gold kryptonite permanently nullifies powers but without harm.
Gold kryptonite, wow. So beyond kryptonite.
Magic was established as a weakness in Superman #171 in 1964. It affects him pretty much like a normal human. He's also vulnerable to psychokinetic phenomena, telekinesis, illusions, mind control, that kind of thing. And naturally, red sun radiation drains his powers.
It's fascinating how much of his mythology was built up over time, often to explain new powers or weaknesses, or even just for plot convenience like the radio show Kryptonite. Take the S-Shield, for example. You said it started as a simple initial. What's the story behind that powerful transformation, and how did it come to mean so much more?
That's a perfect example of this evolution. Initially, yeah, it simply stood for Superman. But it was the writer of the 1978 movie, Tom Mankiewicz, who famously decided to make it the crest of the House of El, Superman's Kryptonian family. This idea was so powerful, so resonant, that it was adopted into later comics and films. Sometimes it's even been given the additional meaning of hope, especially in recent adaptations. It shows how adaptations can really enrich the core mythology.
Definitely. Now, beyond this sort of organic creative evolution who was shaping Superman's character and world through constant editorial decisions, that must have played a huge role.
Oh, a massive role. Editorial oversight was huge. In the early days, Jerry Siegel had a lot of freedom, but by 1940, fear of censors led to stricter oversight. Whitney Ellsworth, hired in 1940, famously banned Superman from killing. He also softened his personality. Early Superman could be quite rough and favored outlandish villains over gritty gangsters. Then came Mort Weisinger, editor from 1941 to 1970. He imposed a much more disciplined approach. He'd assign story ideas and carefully plan the logic of Superman's powers, his origin, his relationships, everything. The Weisinger era saw the introduction of iconic elements like Bizarro, Supergirl, the Phantom Zone, the Fortress of Solitude, Krypto the Superdog, even all those different types of kryptonite. Weisinger largely preferred lighthearted stories, though, and actively avoided tackling real-world issues.
Right, the Silver Age 5. And how did that change when new editors came on board later?
When Julius Schwartz took over in 1970, he attempted to modernize the character. Clark Kent became a TV anchor for a while, and Schwartz reduced the overuse of things like kryptonite and robots. He also scaled Superman's powers down a bit and allowed for more serious drama. Then, in 1986, following the major DC Comics event Crisis on Infinite Earths, which reset much of their universe, Mike Carlin oversaw a big reboot. John Byrne rewrote much of the mythos, further reducing Superman's powers, transforming Lex Luthor from a mad scientist into a powerful, corrupt industrialist, and making Supergirl an artificial life form from a pocket universe to ensure Superman remained the sole Kryptonian survivor. It's this constant process of reinterpretation and tweaking.
That reboot was huge. And speaking of reinterpretations, let's talk about Clark Kent. His identity is truly fascinating. How did that mild-mannered persona become such a key part of the character?
It's all a deliberate choice, a carefully constructed facade. While his middle name is given variously as Joseph, Jerome, or Jonathan, allusions to his creators and adoptive father, everything about his mild-mannered persona was staged to deflect suspicion. He's passive, introverted, has a higher-pitched voice, a slight slouch, wears a bland suit, the glasses. It all makes people underestimate him. This allowed him to receive late-breaking news as a journalist, giving him a plausible reason to be near crime scenes or disasters. His job as a journalist was truly an extension of his mission to bring truth and fight for the little guy. And of course, there are the little visual cues. Superman always sports that distinct spit curl, while Clark keeps his hair neater, and the costume, often conveniently stored, compressed in a secret pouch in his cape.
The spit curl difference, classic.
Yeah.
We can't talk about his evolution without mentioning the death of Superman storyline in the 90s. That was a huge moment, wasn't it? It felt like it was everywhere.
Absolutely. The death of Superman storyline in Superman #75 back in 1993 was monumental. It sold, I think, over 23 million copies and created a genuine media sensation. Now, his death was, as is often the case in comics, temporary. But this was a far cry from his earlier imaginary deaths or quick revivals. This felt like a true, impactful event that really captured the public's imagination. It was a major turning point in how comics were perceived by the mainstream media, too.
Definitely felt different. Okay, what's truly remarkable is how quickly Superman leaped beyond just comic books. It wasn't long before he exploded into other media.
Indeed, almost immediately. The earliest adaptations were incredibly diverse and influential. You had the Adventures of Superman radio show, which ran for over 2,000 episodes from 1940 to 1951. It was primarily aimed at children, with Bud Collyer providing Superman's voice. He famously lowered his voice for Superman and kept it higher for Clark. Then came the exceptionally lavish animated shorts from Fleischer Studios in the early 1940s. These were incredibly expensive for the time, something like $50,000 for the first one, which was huge money back then. It reflected the studio's commitment to quality, and Jer Schuster himself provided the model sheets to ensure the visuals matched the comics. They still look amazing today. And the first live-action adaptation was a movie serial in 1948 starring Kirk Alyn. It became one of the most profitable serials ever made, notably featuring hand-drawn animated flying scenes composited onto the live-action footage because, well, making a man fly convincingly was tough.
Right, those Fleischer cartoons are gorgeous.
Yeah.
From serials, he transitioned to television and then to big-budget feature films. Which of these adaptations really broke new ground?
Well, Adventures of Superman, starring George Reeves, which aired from 1952 to 1958, was the first superhero TV series. It was massively popular. I mean, it even achieved an astonishing 74% audience share in Japan in 1958. But it was the 1978 Superman film, starring the iconic Christopher Reeve, which truly changed the game. Made on a then massive budget, $55 million, equivalent to maybe $265 million today, it became the most successful Superman feature film adjusted for inflation. And you could argue it really paved the way for the wave of big-budget superhero movies we see today, like Tim Burton's Batman later on. It proved these characters could be serious box office draws.
You'll Believe a Man Can Fly. That movie was huge. And he's certainly kept evolving on screen since then, hasn't he?
Absolutely. We've seen various modern adaptations from Henry Cavill in the DC Extended Universe films Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, to even seeing CGI versions of George Reeves, Christopher Reeve, and Nicolas Cage popping up in The Flash recently. And there's a new James Gunn Superman film slated for 2025, generating a lot of buzz. On television, the character has evolved too. From Smallville, which explored Clark's pre-Superman years, to Lois and Clark, which really focused on their relationship, and more recently, Superman and Lois, an animated series like My Adventures with Superman. He's truly a constant presence, always being reimagined.
It wasn't just on screen either. Superman quickly became a massive merchandising empire. How quickly did that side of the business take off? That S-Shield must have been gold.
It took off almost immediately. His iconic chess logo was trademarked way back in August 1938, just months after his debut. And by 1939, Superman Inc. was established specifically to expand the franchise beyond comics. This foresight paid off hugely. In 2018 alone, Superman licensed merchandise generated something like $634 million globally. Earliest paraphernalia included things like a Superman of America Club button and a wooden doll in 1939, and even a crypto ray gun toy in 1940. While most merchandise initially targeted children, adults have been increasingly targeted since the 1970s, really, as the original comic readership aged and nostalgia became a factor. And it's also worth noting, Superman actively supported the WWII effort. He appeared in Action Comics and Superman, urging readers to buy war bonds and participate in scrap drives. He was a patriotic symbol.
Well, $634 million in 1 year recently. That's staggering. Okay, now, here's a part of Superman's story that's maybe less known, but just as dramatic as any villainous showdown, the battle for his very ownership. This gets complicated, right?
Very. This all started with that initial copyright transfer back in 1938. In a contract dated March 1st, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster essentially gave away the copyright to Superman to DC Comics. That $130 they received was for their first 13-page story, not for the character's copyright itself. This was unfortunately common practice in the industry at the time, but they later regretted it immensely as Superman exploded in popularity, generating millions for the company while they were just employees. Now, to be fair, they were paid relatively well for their work until 1947, receiving a substantial sum over that period equivalent to millions today. But the core ownership remained contentious.
That's a significant sum for the time, but it clearly wasn't enough to quell their desire for ownership or recognition. What happened in their first major lawsuit?
The first major lawsuit came in 1947. Siegel and Shuster sued DC for the rights to both Superman and Superboy. Superboy was tricky because DC had published the character based on a script Siegel had submitted years earlier, apparently unbeknownst to him that they were using it. The judge initially ruled that Superman belonged to DC, but Superboy belonged to Siegel. They ultimately settled out of court for around $94,000. A lot of money then, over $1 million today, in exchange for DC gaining full rights to both characters. Then, incredibly, after the settlement, DC fired them.
Fired them after creating Superman. That's harsh. So the fight didn't end there, I imagine. How did it continue through the decades?
No, it continued for decades. Subsequent attempts by Siegel and Shuster to regain rights failed in court. However, a major victory, at least in terms of recognition and support, came from a public campaign in 1975, spearheaded by other creators like Neil Adams. This pressure led to a groundbreaking deal with Warner Bros., DC's parent company. Siegel and Shuster would receive a yearly stipend for life, medical benefits, and, crucially, credit their names in all future Superman productions. That, created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster line, you see, that was a huge victory for creators' rights.
That credit is so important. But the legal story still doesn't end there, does it? What happened with their heirs after they passed away?
Right. After Siegel passed away in 1992 and Shuster in 1996, their heirs continued the legal battles, leveraging newer copyright provisions, specifically termination rights under U.S. copyright law. In 2001, the Siegel heirs accepted a deal from DC that included several $1 million and a substantial yearly stipend for permanent rights, plus that credit line by special arrangement with the Jerry Siegel family, end quote. However, things got complicated again. A copyright lawyer, Mark Toberoff, later struck a deal with both sets of heirs, leading to new lawsuits against DC, claiming the previous agreements weren't binding and attempting to terminate the copyright grant. It got very messy, but ultimately appeals courts sided with DC, upholding the validity of those earlier agreements made by the heirs.
So DC retained the rights, and what does all of this mean for Superman's future in terms of copyright? Is he going into the public domain soon?
It's a fascinating situation. Under current U.S. copyright law, the earliest version of Superman, the one from Action Comics #1, is set to enter the U.S. public domain on January 1st, 2034. However, and this is important, it will only apply to the character as depicted in Action Comics #1 from 1938. So his basic powers then, strength, speed, leaping, invulnerability, the Clark Kent persona, Lois Lane, That version becomes public. But later developments like his power of flight, heat vision, kryptonite, the Fortress of Solitude, and characters like Jimmy Olsen and Supergirl will enter the public domain at later dates based on when they first appeared. So while the earliest version becomes free to use, DC will still hold rights and trademarks related to many of the elements we associate with modern Superman for many years to come. It's not a simple flip switch.
That's a really important distinction. Okay, and as if that weren't enough legal drama, there was the famous lawsuit over Captain Marvel, the original Captain Marvel, now known as Shazam, one of Superman's earliest and most successful imitators, right? What was the core of that dispute?
That was the National Comics Publications v. Fawcett Publications, Inc. lawsuit. DC sued Fawcett for copyright infringement back in 1948 because, well, Captain Marvel was outselling Superman, and there were undeniable similarities in powers, costume elements, and origin. After a very lengthy legal battle, it went on for years, Fawcett eventually decided to settle in 1953. They paid DC a significant sum, around $400,000 then, which is like $4.7 million today, and agreed to cease publication of Captain Marvel comics entirely. Ironically, DC later licensed the character in 1972 and eventually purchased the full rights from Fawcett. They had to rename him Shazam for branding purposes, though, to avoid conflict with Marvel Comics' own Captain Marvel character. It's a clear example of how influential Superman was, even to the point of sparking these major legal battles over imitation.
Absolutely wild story. Okay, let's zoom out now. Beyond the pages and courtrooms, Superman's cultural impact is truly profound. He's often called the archetype, right?
Yeah, he is widely considered the archetypal superhero. Now, you can argue about characters who came slightly earlier, like the Phantom or Zorro or even Ogon Bat in Japan, but it was Superman who truly popularized the genre and established its key conventions: the outlandish costume, the code name, the extraordinary abilities, and an altruistic mission to help humanity. His immense success in 1938 directly launched the golden age of comic books, inspiring a flood of characters like Batman, Captain America, Wonder Woman, and yes, Captain Marvel. He was also one of the very few superheroes who survived the post-World War II sales decline in comics, which allowed him to be there for the Silver Age revival in the late 50s and 60s, influencing the creation of characters like Spider-Man, the Hulk, and the X-Men at Marvel. He's the bedrock.
His influence didn't stop at America's borders either, did it? How did Superman's popularity extend globally? You mentioned Japan earlier.
Yeah, Superman's popularity extended significantly to Japan after WWII. Those 1940s Superman animated shorts were broadcast on Japanese television in 1955, followed by the Adventures of Superman TV show starring George Reeves in 1956. These adaptations were incredibly popular and are credited with directly fueling Japan's own prolific superhero genre. You can see his influence in iconic characters like Astro Boy, whose creator, Osamu Tezuka, was inspired by Mighty Mouse, which itself was a parody of Superman, and it helped give rise to tokusatsu heroes like Supergiant and Ultraman, and even magical girl tropes seen in Sailor Moon. His global reach is just undeniable, and it goes beyond pop culture. Superman's image also transcended into the world of fine art. Since the pop art period in the 1960s, the character has been appropriated, used by numerous visual artists, most notably by dozens like Andy Warhol and Roy Lichtenstein. That really shows his status as a universally recognized icon, like Mickey Mouse or Marilyn Monroe.
That's a great point. And when you delve into literary analysis, the allegories associated with Superman are truly compelling. He's been seen as everything from a social activist to a symbol of urban landscapes. Can you elaborate on some of those interpretations?
Absolutely. Early stories, particularly during the Great Depression, portrayed him as a real social activist. He wasn't just stopping meteors, he was fighting corrupt businessmen, crooked politicians, slumlords, even demolishing tenements. This really reflected the ethos of Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. He even tackled the Ku Klux Klan, anti-Semitism, and veteran discrimination in early radio programs, which was pretty bold for the time. Later analysts like Scott Buchetman noted how Superman humanizes large urban areas. By flying over skyscrapers, he makes the imposing modern city feel open, modernist, and democratic, somehow accessible. And writers like Jules Feiffer, along with Siegel and Shuster themselves, argued that Clark Kent's mild-mannered persona was the real innovation. It embodied wish fulfillment for anyone who felt unseen, awkward, or underestimated. Clark was the mask we wear, in a way.
It seems like his meaning shifts depending on the era and who's looking at him.
Precisely. Cultural critic Ian Gordon suggests that his various incarnations often use nostalgia to link the character to an ideology of the American way: individualism, consumerism, and democracy, particularly during WWII and the Cold War. He became a symbol of American ideals. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, Superman is often read as a powerful immigrant allegory. Think about it. He's an alien who comes to America, adopts an American name and identity, but uses his inherent foreign abilities for the good of his adopted home. Academics like Aldo Regalado saw him challenging the notion that Anglo-Saxon ancestry was the sole source of American might, pushing boundaries of acceptance. Gary Engel argued that Superman asserted the value of the immigrant in American culture, with his dual identity allowing identification with two cultures. Clark Kent as the assimilated individual, and Superman expressing his unique heritage for good. David Rooney even calls it the quintessential immigrant story.
That immigrant reading is really powerful. This raises an important question. What about religious themes? I know some people connecting to biblical stories, particularly Moses or even Jesus.
That's a very popular and often discussed interpretation. Many believe he ties strongly to Judaic mythology, especially Moses. A baby escaping death in a basket or spaceship, sent away by his parents to survive a Holocaust, found and adopted by a foreign culture, and growing up to be a leader and protector. Even his Kryptonian name, Kal-El, resembles the Hebrew Kul-El, which can mean voice of God, and the suffix El, meaning of God, is found in many angelic names in Hebrew tradition. Siegel and Schuster were both Jewish, so these connections seem quite plausible, even if not always consciously intended at first. The Nazis even denounced Superman as Jewish propaganda. Beyond this, occasional, sometimes very deliberate, Christian themes have appeared. Screenwriter Tom Mankiewicz consciously made him an allegory for Jesus in the 1978 film Baby Kal-El Ship, resembling the Star of Bethlehem, Jor-El sending his only son to save Earth, giving him a messianic mission. This was revisited much more explicitly in Man of Steel in 2013, with Jor-El asking Kal-El to essentially redeem the Kryptonian race by guiding humanity towards a better path. It's clear creators have deliberately explored these deep religious and messianic allegories over the years.
We've journeyed through Superman's remarkable story. Wow. From a bald, psychic villain to a global icon of hope. We've touched on his surprising origins, his constant editorial evolution, his expansive presence across all media, and those intense legal battles that shaped his legacy.
It's quite a saga. His very existence reflects not just the evolution of storytelling in comic books, but deeply embedded cultural anxieties, aspirations, and values across decades. He's been a social activist, a symbol of American ideals, an immigrant allegory, and even at times a religious figure. He contains multitudes, as they say.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? Understanding these layers doesn't just make you well-informed about a comic character. It really changes how you see icons you thought you knew. It reveals the profound cultural conversations they embody, often without us realizing it.
And as we look to the future, especially with the earliest version of Superman set to enter the public domain in just under a decade, in 2034, it raises a really interesting question. Given Superman's long history of adaptation and reinterpretation, and the fact that his core 1938 version will soon be freely available, what aspects of his core identity do you believe are truly immutable? What has to remain for him to still be Superman? And which parts are destined for further evolution as new creators get their hands on him in the next century of his story? What stands out to what you are?